At about 11:27 a.m. on October 22, 2003, the honeymoon stopped being a honeymoon. 26-year-old Tina Watson, married for just 11 days, was no longer on the surface. She was on the seabed near the SS Yongala, one of Australia's most iconic wreck dives. There was no video, no clean time-stamped footage, no recording that could replay the last minutes. Just open water, depth, and a disappearance that happened in real time while everyone above could only guess what was happening below. Welcome to Forgotten Faces, a true crime documentary series about women who vanished from ordinary lives and the unanswered questions left behind. Before we continue, where are you watching from? When divers finally reached her, the scene refused to give the world an easy answer. Her regulator was still in her mouth. Her tank still had air. Tests found no equipment fault. The simple accident explanation didn't lock into place. And with no mechanical failure to blame, the case collapsed onto the only thing left, the one element that can change from telling to telling, what people did, what they saw, and what her husband would later say happened down there. Tina was 26, from the Helena Hoover area near Birmingham, Alabama. Public reporting and legal summaries describe her as closely connected to her parents, Tommy and Cindy Thomas, who would become the loudest and most persistent advocates demanding scrutiny of her death. Tina and Gabe were both associated with the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where they met. She worked as a data analyst at an insurance company in Alabama, according to reporting that cites family statements. Friends and family described her as cautious and caring, not naturally adventurous, and some interviews characterized her as anxious about scuba diving. In the months before the wedding, Tina became engaged to Gabe and planned a honeymoon that included Australia and the Great Barrier Reef. Gabe, described as an experienced diver with advanced training, including rescue diver qualifications, encouraged her to obtain basic open water certification so they could dive together. That difference in experience mattered because the Yongala is not treated in the record as a gentle tourist dip. The site lies offshore in open water, often accessed by commercial dive boats from the Townsville area. It is commonly discussed as a more advanced dive due to depth, around 28 to 30 meters, along with currents and the realities of open sea conditions. Those facts are not dramatic decoration. They define what options exist when something goes wrong. At that depth, a diver cannot simply sprint upward without risk. A buddy cannot think about it for long. And once someone sinks away from a controlled descent, the environment becomes unforgiving. On the day of the incident, Tina and Gabe joined a group dive organized through a commercial operator. Divers descended a mooring line toward the wreck. Tina and Gabe were paired as dive buddies, a standard practice in recreational diving intended to create a built-in safety net, two people responsible for tracking each other, assisting each other, and responding to distress. As the group descended, later accounts would place Tina and Gabe close together and then separated. That separation and what followed is the core factual dispute because there is no publicly released CCTV or audio recording from the boat and no underwater video in the official findings that captures the decisive moment. The record you provided preserves two broad streams of account. One is Gabe Watson's account, given in multiple statements over time. In substance, he said Tina signaled distress shortly after descent, that she knocked off his mask and regulator, and that she dropped away despite his attempts to help, after which he surfaced to seek assistance. The other is eyewitness diver testimony, summarized in later materials, describing seeing Tina and Gabe together, then Gabe separating and swimming away while Tina sank toward the bottom. Crew and dive staff statements described the dive conditions, briefings, and the emergency response, and they discussed the Yongala as advanced and Tina as comparatively inexperienced, with recollections of her demeanor varying as such recollections often do. Tina was ultimately recovered from the seabed near the wreck by other divers and brought to the surface. Resuscitation efforts were attempted on the boat using CPR and oxygen. Forensic pathologists concluded she died from drowning, and the coroner recorded an approximate time of death at 11:27 on October 22, 2003. Investigators examined her diving equipment, tank, regulator, buoyancy control device, weight belt. The coroner's findings and later summaries emphasize 3 points. Her regulator was in her mouth when recovered, her tank still contained air, and testing found no equipment fault. That combination does not magically identify the cause of drowning. It does, however, make a purely mechanical failure less persuasive as a complete explanation, pushing attention toward panic, physiological vulnerability, miscommunication, or external interference, without a definitive public finding that settles which it was. Unlike many modern true crime cases, this one does not revolve around a digital trail. There is no public body of phone record timestamps, location pings, or app activity described as the engine of proof. The crucial evidence is physical context, expert interpretation, and human statements, some consistent, some contested. That absence makes consistency and credibility unusually important. When there is no camera, every variation in a statement carries extra weight. After Tina's death, her body was returned to the United States. From that point forward, the case developed a second storyline running alongside the official investigation. Her parents' belief that something more than an accident had occurred, and their public criticism of how the case was handled. They voiced concerns about Gabe's behavior before and after the funeral and raised allegations about life insurance discussions. Those claims became part of the public narrative, but the record also requires caution. There are no public records of restraining orders, prior police reports of domestic violence, or documented threats between Tina and Gabe before the trip. The defense position, described in reporting, was consistent. He maintained Tina's death was an accident, that she panicked and sank unexpectedly, that he attempted but failed to rescue her, and he denied any financial motive. For several years, the legal focus remained in Queensland because the death occurred in Australian waters. In 2007 and 2008, Queensland's coronial inquest examined the death in detail, site difficulty, equipment testing, medical findings, witness statements, and Gabe Watson's various accounts. The inquest's importance cannot be overstated. It was the procedural mechanism that determined whether the evidence justified criminal prosecution. Crucially, later summaries of the inquest emphasize that the coroner noted inconsistencies across Gabe's versions of events. Reporting and official commentary often reference the number of different accounts as unusually high, around 16 versions, though the record also notes the risk of misquoting what the coroner did and did not find. The written findings did not claim to prove an intentional killing beyond doubt. Instead, the coroner treated the death as suspicious and concluded the evidence was sufficient to commit the matter to criminal court. In June 2008, a formal charge was laid in Queensland alleging that Gabe Watson murdered Tina at the Yongala site. That step transformed the case from a disputed tragedy into a criminal allegation. But it also forced a hard strategic question. Could Queensland prosecutors prove murder beyond reasonable doubt with the evidence available, given the underwater environment, the lack of direct recording, and the contested expert interpretations? In May 2009, after initial resistance and procedural delays described in some reporting, Gabe Watson traveled from the United States to Australia to face the charge. On June 5, 2009, the case took a decisive turn in the Supreme Court of Queensland in Brisbane. Watson pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. The basis was criminal negligence. Prosecutors accepted a plea grounded in the claim that, as Tina's designated buddy and a highly experienced diver, he breached a duty of care by failing to exercise reasonable care and skill to assist her when she was in difficulty, contributing to her drowning. He admitted to that breach as part of the plea, while maintaining he did not intentionally kill her. This is where the case becomes a study in legal proof versus public certainty. To family convinced the death was intentional, a manslaughter plea can look like a compromise that falls short of moral truth. To prosecutors tasked with winning under strict evidentiary standards, a manslaughter conviction can look like the most reliable endpoint available when murder is suspected but may not be provable. Legal scholars later discussed this case in precisely that frame. Plea bargaining under uncertainty, shaped by disputed expert reconstructions and the practical challenge of proving intent in an underwater incident. Sentencing followed, Watson received 4.5 years imprisonment, suspended after 12 months, with time served. Reporting in your sources describes the likely custody time as about 18 months. The sentence triggered further controversy. Queensland's Attorney General appealed, arguing the sentence was manifestly inadequate. The Court of Appeal increased the non-parole period to 18 months, leaving the overall term unchanged, but adjusting the minimum custody. The legal result in Queensland, however, did not become murder. It remained manslaughter by plea, tied to the duty of care breach. For Tina's parents, the Queensland outcome did not close the case emotionally, and it did not close it strategically. Their public advocacy continued, and the legal story began shifting toward the United States. Alabama authorities pursued a separate theory, that the death was not only intentional, but tied to planning and pecuniary gain rooted in Alabama, involving life insurance policies. That theory would face a different courtroom, a different standard, and different evidentiary rules. In November 2010, a Jefferson County grand jury in Alabama indicted Gabe Watson on 2 counts of capital murder related to Tina's death, one alleging murder during kidnapping and another alleging murder for pecuniary gain tied to life insurance policies. The case now carried the most severe label in the American system, despite the death occurring overseas. The prosecution posture, as described in your dataset, involved international cooperation and an arrangement that Alabama would not seek the death penalty in order to secure Watson's return to U.S. jurisdiction after he completed the Australian sentence. By February 2012, the Alabama case reached trial. If Queensland had been built around the duty of care breach at the dive site, Alabama's case had to do something more demanding: prove intentional murder connected to a motive theory beyond reasonable doubt inside a court that strictly controls what evidence jurors may hear. In a case already lacking a definitive recording of the incident and lacking a modern digital evidence spine, admissibility rulings became the load-bearing beams of the entire prosecution. During the trial, Judge Tommy Nail ruled that several categories of evidence Alabama prosecutors wanted to use were inadmissible. Reporting summarized these rulings as excluding certain post-incident behavior evidence and limiting insurance-related testimony, among other categories. That matters because the state's narrative depended on persuading jurors not only that Tina's death was preventable or negligent, but that it was intentional and motivated. When motive evidence is narrowed, the prosecution must lean more heavily on inference from disputed reconstructions and human accounts of an event that occurred in a place uniquely resistant to certainty. Alabama prosecutors still advanced their theory that Watson planned and carried out Tina's murder and sought to profit from life insurance benefits. The defense maintained the opposite, that Tina's death was a tragic accident in a demanding environment, shaped by panic and misjudgment rather than malice, and that the state could not prove intent. Expert disagreement and the lack of direct physical proof of equipment sabotage made that proof problem more severe. The record you provided also emphasizes that conventional forensic evidence like fingerprints or DNA played little role given the underwater context. The case hinged on dive physics, equipment evaluation, witness observations, and the coherence or incoherence of statements. The critical moment in Alabama did not come at the end of a long jury deliberation. It came immediately after the prosecution finished presenting its case. After the state rested, the defense moved for a directed verdict of acquittal, arguing there was insufficient evidence for the case to go to the jury. Judge Nail agreed. On February 23, 2012, he granted the motion and entered an acquittal, citing insufficient evidence for the jury to consider. Reporting and academic commentary emphasize that the defense did not need to present a full case with witnesses because the judge ruled the state's evidence could not, as a matter of law, support a conviction. That acquittal carried a second consequence that often gets lost in the emotion of a courtroom ending. It invoked double jeopardy protection, meaning Watson could not be tried again on the same Alabama charges. For Tina's family, this was not simply another loss. It was a procedural lock on the only murder prosecution they believed could still deliver the outcome they sought. For legal observers, it became a stark demonstration that courtroom outcomes can hinge not only on what people believe happened, but on what evidence survives admissibility rulings and meets the minimum threshold required to reach a jury. After 2012, the case shifted again, away from courtrooms and into public memory and analysis. Major outlets revisited it. Documentaries and legal studies treated it as a cross-jurisdiction case study. The record you provided is frank about limitations. Underlying trial transcripts, full investigative files, comprehensive dive computer data, and complete insurance documentation are not all publicly available. Some scuba technical reports and expert evidence are summarized rather than reproduced. Without those materials, independent reconstruction remains constrained. That constraint explains why the central factual dispute persists even after the law has finished. The legal system resolved responsibility only in the ways it can. Queensland secured a manslaughter conviction tied to an admitted breach of duty of care, and Watson served the custodial portion of his sentence. Alabama pursued a capital murder case and ended with a directed verdict acquittal that cannot be retried. Those outcomes do not produce a universally satisfying story because they do not answer the emotional question many people ask first: what really happened in those minutes, with a single conclusive mechanism. What can be stated cleanly from the record is narrower but firm. Tina died by drowning during a honeymoon dive at the SS Yongala. Equipment testing did not identify a fault. Expert interpretation of mechanism remained contested. The coroner treated the death as suspicious enough to be committed to criminal court. Queensland accepted a manslaughter plea based on breach of duty of care. Alabama's murder prosecution ended in acquittal due to insufficient evidence after key exclusions. Everything beyond that, motive certainty, precise underwater step-by-step sequence, physiological triggers, remains disputed, incomplete, or not publicly confirmable at the level required for a documentary-grade conclusion. And that is the quiet chill at the center of this case. It is not that the world forgot Tina Watson. It is that the place where she died, deep water, moving currents, an unfilmed emergency, made the truth unusually difficult to pin down in the way people expect. The law could punish an admitted failure of care. It could not, in the end, prove deliberate murder to the standard required in Alabama. Between those two endpoints sits the same hard fact the record returns to repeatedly: 2 courts, 2 countries, 1 death, and a permanent gap between suspicion and proof that no headline can fully close. If you want more evidence-first cases where the tension comes from records, rulings, and what can be proven, honeymoon deaths, vacation disappearances, or partner-link cases that split legal outcomes across jurisdictions, subscribe and tell me which category you want next.